Hi, everyone.
Hello.
So,
Hey, Kristen, I'm not allowed to drop anything in the chat right now, but I'm going to go to that back channel and see if I can get access.
okay, great. And I am able to put things in the chat, so I got that. I think we may have some folks who are not on mute. If you can mute yourself, potentially, if you may be off mute. Thanks so much. First of all, I just want to thank everybody for being here. I know that it's an incredibly hairy time of year and that there's a lot going on that's very disturbing in the country and especially stressful for folks of color. And just considering like personal safety and thinking about everything that people are dealing with right now, I just appreciate you being here. And I know that just in normal life, there's always a lot going on in the evening, so appreciate your commitment. Tonight, we're not trying to reach a consensus. We're just trying to give feedback. And I know, as Steven said, that he's having a little bit of trouble dropping the Jamboard into the chat, but I think I can grab it and drop it in. So just give me 1 second and I will do that. What we're going to do is spend a little bit of time to reflect. Oh, there it is. I'll spend a little bit of time to reflect on the questions. So before we start talking, I know some folks process better with talking, but other folks process better silently. So we're going to try to do some of both. But we'll spend about 5 minutes at least for folks to jot down some thoughts on the Jamboard, and then we can talk and continue to jot. So let's say 7 minutes. We'll take until 6:40 for people to jot down thoughts that they have. You'll notice again, Stephen, do you mind presenting the Jamboard so you can show folks how to navigate through it in case they're not as familiar?
Yeah, 1 second. Let me turn my camera on, and also I'm going to link the meeting packet PDF that people can kind of look through with the different options in case they don't have it convenient.
Awesome, thanks. And I can actually, if it's easier, I can present the Jamboard while you get the other stuff into the chat. I'll go ahead and, oh.
I can do it right now.
Got it, okay.
Yeah.
So again, you'll see that the meeting packet is there for you to access the data that you would need. And then the Jamboard is in the chat. And if you're less familiar with how to use Jamboard, you'll notice that at the top, you have arrows that go back and forth. So Stephen, if you wouldn't mind navigating through so we can see where the different slides are with the different questions. There are 4 slides.
Can y'all see can you see me going through the slides, Kristen?
No, I think there might be a lag. We're still on the first
Interesting.
slide.
Okay, let me stop share and reshare. Okay.
Okay, now we're on slide 4. There we go. So yeah,
one.
arrows at the top are the way to navigate through. Do you mind showing folks how to grab a Post-it?
Yeah, there's slide 1 and then 2, 3, 4 up the top. And to grab a Post-it, this little sticky note comes up below the cursor icon, and you click, it pops up there, so you won't be able to see the whole Jamboard. You can choose your color of Post-it note, but then you can write whatever you want to, and if you're going to write a note about option A, and then whatever you want to write, and then you just hit save, and it puts it there, and it kind of adjusts the size. If you need to adjust it there, make it smaller, whatever you need to do, you can. And then if you just you may have to move it around because they're going to populate over each other. And then if you have to delete it, you can just click on it and either hit delete, or if you need to edit it also, you can click these 3 little buttons and click edit, duplicate, or delete. So I click edit, there we are, and delete, there we are. So as we go through there, you can jot notes like Kristen said, and also feel free to hop around to the different pieces if one speaks to you more than another right now.
Great, thanks. And I see people are already starting to jot some notes. So we're going to be quiet now and let you do that. We'll take until 6:41 and then we'll come back together to start talking a little bit. All right, we're coming back, and I see that there's a question in the chat from Logan who says that they're confused by question 2. Let's talk about the first question, and then we'll get to question 2 and what it's intended to mean. So I know that some folks have said that they process better when we can talk through things out loud. So I'd invite anyone either who wrote something on the Jamboard and wants to share it, or who maybe didn't write something but wants to say it aloud, to share their thoughts on that first question. I'm going to give it another little bit of wait time, and then I may call on some folks to share what they're thinking.
I'm really concerned by the fact that all of these options have such high utilization numbers, especially at Kellogg, since we know that that one is more likely than not going to expand even more.
Thanks. Jackson, do you want to pop in? Okay, thanks. Who else is interested in sharing something? So, go ahead.
I think I would really want to hear, since most of these are surrounding Creston not being included in the original recommendation, I feel like I need to hear from Creston on these options.
Thanks. I wonder too, and I don't know the answer to this question, and maybe I think if Rachel's in here, she can answer it, but if we might be able, if there were over enrollment, if that might be fixed through other pathways, like it might be over enrolled for a year, but then if other boundaries are changed in phase 2, if that would cause less over enrollment for future years. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer because it's hard to know what the boundaries could be when we move into phase 2 of the project. I will say that if, Kellogg does end up being closer to full capacity, boundaries are an option to help relieve some of that. It just sort of depends on what the community feels comfortable changing the boundaries to. Does that sort of answer your question, Kristen?
Yeah, thank you.
Kristen, I looked at the 2-year PSU forecasts. They haven't given us the newest one yet. And I do see that there, for the 6th through 8th grade at these different feeders that would be combined into Kellogg, there is some more growth happening next year, but then it'll go down a tiny bit. But it only goes out to 5-year forecast. So.
Thanks. And I see Beth said in the chat that she feels it would be more likely to go the other way because of the KE conversions, leaving K5s under enrolled. So people are mentioning overcrowding. People are mentioning Spanish DLI students from Atkinson will continue in essentially a single strand model. Is there room and ability to reunite all in 22-23 at Kellogg? That everybody's again affected by overcrowding, concerns about splitting Creston, interested in what Creston has to say about it.
So, hi, I have an interesting experience. So I have an older son who did the Spanish immersion with Atkinson, Mount Tabor, and now is at Franklin. And then I have a 5th grader at Creston. So I don't really know like which school I'm supposed to represent, but I will say that my understanding, I don't want to speak entirely for the Creston community, but they're concerned there's going to be boundary changes that are going to have to happen regardless because their enrollment, even as a K through 8th, is already so low. And then when they lose the 6th to 8th graders, they're concerned that they really might need to absorb some ideas have been floating around, but I don't think they have all the stuff they need to do the numbers is, what will happen because we're already struggling at like 74% capacity as a K-8. So what will happen when we're K-5? So it's my understanding they would obviously prefer all of Creston go to Kellogg, but they would rather be split and provide their kids with a middle school experience than stay at K-8, just because it's every year we face shifting, and it's just very challenging to continue to function at 74% capacity as a K-8 and really give middle schoolers a middle school experience. So again, I don't want to speak for everybody from Creston, but that's kind of my understanding of where the majority of the parents are thinking.
Thanks, Savannah. And that actually would be a great thing to add to that second slide. And I know Logan was asking about what the second slide question is intended to mean. So the question is, how are stakeholders in support or opposition to the options? And I take that as being not just the stakeholders at Creston, but obviously stakeholders at other schools who might be impacted by what happens at Creston. So from what we know about the entire process, where would we see support? Where would we see opposition? Do we want to take some time to write first and then come back to talk? Do people have a strong feeling one way or the other? So let's take 5 minutes to write where you notice opposition or support for the options, not just from Creston families, but potentially also from other communities that would be impacted by the decision that would be made. And then we'll talk about it.
My confusion was less like what it means and more how am I supposed to be able to answer that? Do we have any data on that?
We don't have any new data in terms of like surveys from families at Creston or anything like that. I think we're intended to consider the other information that we've heard from families from other parts of the process. And yes, if folks don't feel that they have much to say on this one, you can also feel free while folks are writing to navigate through to suggestions that you have.
Kristen, I just want to make a clarifying point. There's a note regarding Bridger families and the South of Division. I just want to make it really clear. We're not at this point assigning any Bridger neighborhood kids to Kellogg. We expect to have that conversation with them, come up with the best possible plan. This is just a placeholder. We just didn't want you to do thinking about other kids, Creston, other things without some holder in case Bridger is affected as well. And as a reminder, the Kellogg school is in the Bridger boundary. Like it's not in the, and so there are kids who are in Bridger neighborhood who are literally 1-2 blocks away from Kellogg, but wouldn't be assigned there. We'll be meeting with that community soon to talk about Bridger, talk about other options, and come up with the best plan that we can together, and we'll let you know what that is when it happens.
Thanks.
Thank you for that clarification.
I'm gonna increase the size of some of the postage just so that we can see more easily what folks are rating. So I'm thinking, because it looks like we're not writing a lot of things, that we may want to talk about this piece a bit and then move on to the next question, which is really about suggestions. And I know that a lot of what folks are saying is, hey, we don't have any new information. This doesn't seem like something that we can really offer many suggestions on. I see a posted that says, this seems like the conversation we had last time. It's hard to answer because we don't have new information, says somebody else. Concerned about utilization numbers being high. Wondering if people will be happy at all if their students are not going to Kellogg. Worried about disruption for the Spanish immersion kids who are currently at Tabor. Wondering about Bridger families' responses. And concerns about domino effects. Somebody wrote, it makes sense to allow the 25 Bridger families south of the division to continue to Kellogg. Does anyone want to talk about what they wrote? Or conversely, if you didn't write anything, want to offer something?
One of the things that I was thinking as I was looking at both option A and option C is that we are looking at either a DLI program remaining in a single strand and how that centers those families' voices. And then I'm looking at option C and seeing the overcrowding at Hosford, where we know we've had a lot of conversation about the placement of our Chinese DLI program there as well, and being concerned about capacity in that building. And so I'm wondering, like, how we're centering those families' voices and experiences in this process too.
Thanks. And Tanya, I don't see that on the Jamboard yet. Would you mind also adding something to that effect? Thanks.
Tanya, how do you think it would be for Mount Tabor Middle School to keep the sixth graders that came in this year during COVID through 8th grade, and then start maybe routing the Atkinson kids to Kellogg? Just because I really worry that those kids in particular are going to be COVID this year, then they end up with they're at Mount Tabor, and then they would go to Kellogg, which seems very disruptive for middle school students, which are already going through so much and have been through so much with COVID. Do you feel like the school could handle it?
I think I'm less concerned about like if the school could handle it, because I think, you know, we're already operating at 106% capacity as it is. I think I'm more concerned about the integrity of that program. And when you have that single strand that weeds down year by year about staffing and support for those students as they move through that program, it definitely would not be the same rich experience that they would receive in a robust program at a middle school with multiple strands. And I can only imagine what it looks like as an 8th grader, where you are the only class in a single class of Spanish DLI in that final year. So I think that could be kind of isolating and maybe not the best programming or staffing options for us too. That was some of the thought process I had about it.
Yeah. It makes sense for them then to continue on to Kellogg this year or next year. So they're not just only 1 year at Kellogg, 1 year in Mount Tabor, and 1 year online.
I noticed on the next slide under suggestions, somebody wrote, we spent a lot of time talking about how important keeping attendance around 80% was for Kellogg's first year, and wondering about what we could do to decrease enrollment. And it looks like maybe that comment got cut off. So there might be more that somebody wanted to add to that. And then someone else asked about being stuck on the north and south of Powell option, or could we change the boundaries again? Do folks want to talk about those?
Oh, I wrote the 80% one, and that was what I was wondering about how we could decrease the attendance at Kellogg, because all the solutions actually are doing exactly the opposite of what we were told was needed in December. And I still can see that if we're not even opening the school yet and the school's at 97%, that once it's open, it's going to be immediately over capacity. So there were two solutions for decreasing attendance in the proposals that were put forward. And I was thinking, what would happen if we actually took the two proposals to decrease attendance? And that was what the solution, the solution was for this coming year.
When you say the solutions for decreasing attendance, do you mean the ones that would increase or maintain attendance somewhere else where it would be a utilization issue, or did you have a different suggestion for how to decrease?
I think one of them was in terms of the attendance at the schools now going to Kellogg and making sure that it was just kids that were in the Kellogg neighborhood boundary that were going, and they would return to their neighborhood schools, which I don't really like, but I don't know what else to do. And then the other one was keeping the kids at Mount Tabor Middle School, but hearing Tanya, I can see that would be very, very challenging to make it work. But I definitely don't think that the sixth graders that are, I mean, yeah, the sixth graders this year should go from online school to Mount Tabor Middle School to Kellogg. I think that would be super disruptive. Maybe there's other ways to decrease attendance.
Other thoughts about that, or about some of the other things that have been written so far?
And for clarification, Andrew, you would do those things, but not bring in Creston. Is that correct?
Right. Though I really like the splitting Creston. I think that's something that we'll probably get into and talk about in the phase 2. I think that's what we talked about, is where the boundaries would be, and we still have a lot of boundary adjustments. And even in terms of Kellogg's attendance in above 90, I don't know, Beth, if what you were saying in the chat was that those schools, we would probably be trying to increase attendance in all those elementary schools, which would then mean that there's more threat of overcrowding at Kellogg in the immediate future, which I think is a very wise point indeed.
Can I ask a question? Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm a little still confused on, I didn't go to the board meeting, so maybe that's where I need clarity, but did the board say we're not accepting this recommendation and you need to find a way to fit Creston in? Because
I wouldn't say the board as a whole said that. I would say individual members said, please go back and figure out Creston.
Figure out, because I know this has sort of already been said, and maybe I just need to say it out loud to get over it, but like, we already did this and there isn't a way. That's what we came up with in December. There wasn't a way to do it. That's why we said we couldn't do it. So it's partly, I feel like the same with COVID, like everybody keeps changing the rules here. And we had rules to follow. We followed them. We came up with a recommendation. Is it true now that the rule, like, in order to get over this, do I just need to say, okay, then now our new rule is we're okay with 95% utilization? Because if it is, then I think we can make a decision.
So Sabrina, what happened at the board was we had community members from Creston who came and made advocacy based on what they were told in the past, long before Kellogg was rebuilt.
Okay.
And they're stating that this is what they were promised and this is, what they were expecting.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't understand why all of a sudden they're the ones excluded. And then we had, so of course, because of their advocacy, of course, we also had board members say, well, we do need to go back and take a look at the process again and see how we can accommodate their needs. So that's pretty much what happened at the board.
Okay.
And that's why we want input. So we worked on creating 3 options. We're going to take the input back to say this is the best we can do and then see where we go from there.
Okay, well, that's super helpful because that makes it sound like one of the options is to say we came back to the same conclusion that we came to in December after weeks and weeks and weeks of meeting together, right?
Yes, that's why we said come up with a 4th one. If we came up with 3.
Yeah.
If your 4th one is, it is what it is, then hey.
Okay, well, thank you. That's helpful. I've been kind of stuck a little bit.
And Esther, just to confirm, the proposal that we advanced in December put Kellogg and still keeps Kellogg at 87% essentially. Is that?
I think it was about 82.
Okay.
Well, it's right at 90, and that's with
Oh,
that's with a higher, like with the way we're counting it now. That's closer to what you could really expect next year.
The one sort of mitigating factor in that, though, if we're not talking about Creston, is that the temporary Bridger enrollment, in theory, goes away because Bridger doesn't have a Kellogg assignment permanently. So I feel like that might somewhat alleviate the numbers moving forward. If let's say we open at 90% and don't do anything, and then it's just suddenly at 100%.
But Dee, wouldn't it be really likely that those, if we're assuming sort of that south of division, that at least some portion of that neighborhood would probably be reassigned out of Bridger into a Kellogg feeder?
That's the thing. I put that note on there too. You're right. Like, it's so hard to make these calls because, like, just looking at the enrollment numbers with what's left when you pull the middle schools out, like, I feel like we know something's going to happen that's going to drastically change the feeders for the existing schools. And it's just, it just feels really hard to sort of fixate on the percentages of this scenario, knowing that there's so much that has to change.
And that was the reason why we tried to keep stuff low, or the percentage low, because we don't know what's happening in phase 2, and we need wiggle room to move the Rubik's Cube around, so to speak. And it was also, you know, I did advocate pretty strong in that last meeting for not having 3 schools going to Kellogg. And again, I mean, I'm feeling like maybe Arletta and Creston should both not go to Kellogg next year until we figure boundaries out and keep the attendance low, so that when we get to phase 2, which there's a lot of work to do in phase 2, our hands aren't tied with the high enrollment that's already at Kellogg. I mean, I think we have to figure out lane, and I think we have to pay attention to the Chinese immersion program, and I heard a lot of people talking about wanting to preserve it, you know, so moving the kids around and then moving back somewhere else, just especially after a year of distance learning, just seems to me not the right thing. So I'm feeling like we need a more cautious approach than anything that's now been advanced, and that means less schools going to Kellogg.
Misha, did you have another suggestion based on the idea of Creston being at a different comprehensive middle school?
No, not necessarily. I think, was it scenario B that had the lowest utilization rates? Sorry, my computer's having trouble multitasking this evening to see the scenarios, but scenario B having the lowest utilization rates, and then also did that one have Creston looking at different feeders? So it's not a suggestion, it's more of a question, I guess. Anyone?
It was a difference of 2 students between A and B.
Oh, okay. Is that Andrew?
And yeah, it's all 97.6% is, I mean, all these.
Except at Mount Tabor, there's a significant difference.
Okay.
So I see there was a new note added about neighborhood students only leaving Spanish GLI at Mount Tabor and Creston south of Powell, plus 25 from Bridger, would have an enrollment of 617 at Kellogg. I think the issue then is the enrollment at other schools, including Tabor.
Andrew, can I ask you a question about your Arleta Creston staying where they are thing?
Was it Arleta? I'm hoping I'm saying the right one. It was Mary.
It is Arleta. I think you were just slightly mispronouncing it, maybe, but how would you know?
How do you say it?
Arleta.
Arleta, okay.
Yeah, which I only know because I've known people that have worked there. But anyhow, Arleta, what would it look like if Arleta stayed? What would it look like if Arleta didn't go to Kellogg next year? Would they stay at K-8 another year?
Yeah, I mean, the same as Creston. It's
right. Okay.
I mean,
I'd really like to say that, you know, Harrison Park is staying at K8 another year no matter what. And that's our lowest SES school in Southeast Portland. And I think if anybody has a right to be upset about it, it's them. And, you know, and we always knew that was going to be happening. I feel like 1 year to figure things out and make it good is a whole lot better than overcrowding a brand new middle school that's already going to have so many hurdles just because it's brand new, but also because it's coming back from COVID. We're going to have all kinds of new things. Do we really need overcrowded to add to that?
Logan, would you rather add that to the board, or would you rather Stephen add that for you to the board?
I'm not sure where it goes because it's not a suggestion. It's just I
think it could be I mean, it sounds like a suggestion.
Okay.
In terms of what I think I hear you saying is we should wait on Creston because they're in the same boat as Harrison Park, who are already waiting. Is that what
it makes sense to do it right instead of fast?
Yeah, I agree. And I could option 4 be, we would like to stick with what we originally suggested, and here's our rationale. I totally understand. I understand why Creston was asking, but I mean, I understood that in December too.
That still leaves us at 90%, which I think is too high. I mean, I don't think it gives us any room to work in phase 2. And
do you remember at the last meeting, I feel like it was in our group, somebody shared some of the experiences of the Northeast Middle School that opened overcrowded. And that was like really impactful to me, of hearing sort of what a miserable experience that was, and parents were pulling their kids out. And I just don't want to ignore, I feel like that's maybe because it didn't get said to the whole group, that it's like not bad. You're potentially creating misery for 800 kids just to solve a 1 year thing, and a bunch of teachers and a bunch of staff. And that just feels really, it feels a little demoralizing after having done all of this work to try to come up with something that works, to maybe just throw it back in and be like, well, let's just do something that we already agreed wouldn't work.
Yeah. It was Ockley Green that had that experience. And I think if we had any teachers or admin from Ockley Green here, they would agree with what you just said.
Could we make
I do think, though, that the difference between this 90% is that these are, as Judy was saying, intentionally sort of overrepresenting to sort of account for that. So we were wanting to stay below 80 with the original recommendation because we didn't know what that might look like. So this is sort of building some of that in. So the 90 is less scary than it would have been in December with the numbers we were looking at that point.
Is it possible to see what the percentage would be if Arleta was not going to Kellogg next year? And I would be interested in potentially advancing that as a proposal, depending on what that number is.
Rachel, are you able to pull that for us?
Yes, I'll pull that right now.
Great, thanks.
So Arleta has a total of 168 current grades 5 through 7 students, and that includes a special ed focused classroom. So it's a big portion of Kellogg enrollment.
And what's Marysville? I'm sorry, I should have this.
Marysville is 141.
And Lent?
Lent, Spanish immersion and neighborhood is 182.
Thank you.
Again, I have another question. So if say we take out Arleta and swap and put in Creston, the numbers are the same. How do you think the Arleta community is going to feel? And like geographically, is one closer to the other? You know,
I'm saying remove both of them, keep them both from attending. That's
okay.
I'm not saying one or the other. I'm saying let's keep the numbers low so we can do phase 2.
Okay, so that would be like 260 kids. Is that right, Judy?
And Misha, the Creston community actually did say they did not want anybody to be taken out, you know, and substituted with their students. They did make that clear.
Right, but the reason to do it isn't based on Creston's original, they were left out. It's because the numbers that we were working with in December have changed, suggesting that enrollment is much higher than we understood it to be when we were planning in December.
Right.
I do want to note that we're scheduled to already be pulled back into the big group. Do we know any adjustments that may have been made with that?
Yeah, it's 7:15.
Okay, so we have 4 minutes.
I think since we have one middle school principal here, I'm curious, is it sort of an easier intermediate solution to have an existing middle school be over enrolled, like i.e. Hosford, because they could, in theory, handle the enrollment because they're not also dealing with a whole new staff versus trying to split it between a brand new school and a not brand new school? Are there any thoughts about that?
Tanya, I think that's directed to you.
And I'm sitting here pondering it, and I'm not sure that I really know the answer to it.
To put you on the spot, but
no, it's totally okay. I mean, if I'm real, we're already dealing with an overcapacity issue at Tabor and have for years. We've been operating at, like, I think the numbers were 106% already. And option A changes nothing for us. It's all the same feeders. It's all the same programs. So I don't know how it would feel at Hosford to do that as well. I'm assuming with a neighborhood adjustment, like it might not feel as significant as adding like a new strand in a new program. So, but if you adjust those programs later, like I started thinking like, what is the impact of moving, like if you left Spanish DLI at Tabor for a year and then transition them over, what then happens with the acclimation of those students into that new school community? How do they and their families feel moving from one to the other, having not been part of that initial kind of community building in that new school too? So it's hard to say.
Min is asking in the chat about Creston's 5 to 7 enrollment. Judy, do you have that handy?
Creston 5 to 7 is 134 students.
Thanks.
I thought, Judy, there's also a number that you gave earlier that I think we could take out because either they don't live in the neighborhood or something.
There's a total of 41 students in that 134 number who are not residents of the Creston neighborhood. About 20 of those are kids, 15 to 20 are kids who are in the special ed focus classroom.
Chuck, as a teacher at Creston, is there something that you'd like to share with the group?
Well, my concern, I don't know if you can hear me. I know my Zoom is always bad.
Yeah, we got you.
My concern has always been about equity in terms of programming, and Creston has been woefully short over all these years. And that's my huge concern about this whole movement of keeping Creston as Creston, because they are not being provided elective opportunities as many other schools are.
Thanks for sharing that. So we have about 24 seconds before the breakout rooms close. And I know we are going to be coming back together for a second breakout in a bit.
Thanks, everybody.
I think we're talking about pausing for a year, not giving equity to Creston or Leda or Leda or any of the other schools. It's just about careful planning and not rushing.
All right, welcome back. So the first question that we're asked to discuss is, as we reflect on phase one, what are areas of improvement or further growth? And so feel free to either record on the Jamboard. We can also have that conversation aloud. I don't think we need to take time to record first and then talk. This is a less kind of meaty question.
Again, we're waiting on the chat to be enabled. That's done now, so I'll post that in.
So again, the question is, as we reflect on phase one, what are areas of improvement or further growth? And Stephen just posted the Jamboard.
Well, I can speak out of my present situation right now, which is I'm a little nervous about putting in a ton of time and then being asked to reconsider everything. I don't know how that can be addressed, but it's a worry of mine.
So kind of consistency from beginning to end in terms of the frame and what we're asked to determine and how we're asked to consider it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't mind the idea of reconsidering things, but I think that it should happen within the time frame, like this whole evening tonight should have happened within the phase 1 time frame. And I understand why it didn't, because we ran out of time, but it's like, well, there has to be an end somewhere. I guess I'm just going to say this too. I think that I'm a principal in PPS, and I totally take my position as part of the district. I feel like we do a disservice often by setting up this cycle. Like, we're going to listen to you, we're going to take your input, but then we're not going to really accept your input, and we're going to go back and do it again. And it just, I think there are really hard decisions to make, and sometimes they just have to be made.
Thanks for sharing that. Sabrina, would you be willing to capture kind of the key elements of that in a post?
Yes.
Thanks.
I
see Jackson is writing in the chat that 3 hours a week was unsustainable for his motivation and ability to commit wholly to the process.
Wasn't there mention of it happening every other week moving forward? Yeah.
Yes. And I think someone else may have started to jump in and then maybe changed their mind.
Yeah, I wanted to give space for Jackson's comment to be seen.
Thanks.
And I completely agree with that. Oh my goodness. I also, I'm completely with Sabrina. I'm feeling really frustrated that this got thrown back at us this way. And I'm having a hard time moving past that to be suggestive instead of complainy. But something that I saw in the chat, and I also am really thinking, is that I feel like, due to the fact that Harrison Park has not been allowed to be a part of this discussion, Harrison Park as a middle school, I mean, and the feeder pattern to that middle school, I just feel like we have to look at this as a flexible plan. I mean, I don't see any way that we can possibly say these are the feeder patterns that are going to work. I mean, who's going to Harrison Park Middle School? We didn't leave anyone.
Thank you.
And I agree with you on the Harrison Park piece. I think the last meeting or the last few meetings, that's how I feel when we keep putting the schools adjacent to Harrison Park all feeding into Kellogg. And that's, I mean, we can't already predict. It's going to be hard to do the next phase. And I think to what Sabrina said, I do feel the process was, phase 1 is really rushed, and especially the last 3 meetings. Actually, we spent the last 2 meetings discussed about the Kellogg feeder. So I don't think that was really enough time, and we felt that it wasn't enough a discussion that too. So I think knowing that we can always come back and talking about it, even though it means more time spent into it, but if that's needed, I think that should happen. Either it is now or is back in December if there was another meeting. So I think we should, and I get the feeling people saying that we spent so much time talking about it, but I'm reflecting, what do we really talk about? Most of the time was not really about Kellogg feeder in those 4 months. And again, then I didn't really say anything because I was just really looking at everyone's feedback, and I agree with some of, or a lot of those, but But I do want to say that one of the reasons that I object the recommendation on the Creston piece because Creston has a much smaller 6 to 8 program. I think what if it was swapping with a school that have more, higher enrollment? If we feel like, hey, keeping one K8, staying K8, and that's acceptable, then I would say keeping a bigger one than a small one because it's hard for the programming. So that's my thought on that.
Min, you're saying that we should keep a bigger K8 as a K8 as opposed to a smaller K8 as a K8 if there has to be a choice? Yeah,
that will also help with the utilization rate there. If people think 90% is too high, originally the numbers we were looking at is very different from what we're looking at today. And the other feedback on the process in phase 1, I feel as a person of color and also the only Chinese speaking representative, I felt this great responsibility of reaching out to the community. I don't think that is really my responsibility, to be honest. I feel this should be done by PBS. So I'm really hoping PBS could do that piece. So I'm not having, spend all the time like everybody else and looking at all the scenarios, digging into the data, and then try to do all kinds of stuff and coming to the meeting. And then I'm having to do all the outreach as well, trying to get people's feedback, and that should have done by PBS. So please make that happen. I was so overwhelmed with everything going on.
I wrote on a post-it insufficient representation and input from Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and had to be done by parents instead. Does that capture that piece?
Yeah, definitely providing translation to the materials. like presentation, that's, I think, is an easy piece, and all the scenarios that's going to be proposed. And also, I saw that board, the PBS staff report to the board, and it was saying that there was interpretation of meetings or interpreter available for the meetings. I think it would be helpful if there are interpreters, even though coalition members don't need that service, that it would be good for the interpreters to translate the meeting basically, and then so people who don't speak English can watch and understand and follow what's going on, because that is right now is a privilege to people who speak English, and people just exclude other people excluded from the process. And then the other piece about the translation is I see the survey in different languages, and we also need to ensure that if people submitted their survey in their feedback in the survey, and that need to be translated back so everybody can see that as well.
Thank you. And SC Jackson's also saying having translated materials ready available ASAP. And then I see that Chuck was talking about concern about small K8s and the difficulty of programming and trying to provide electives. Chuck, does that translate into something that you'd like to see in terms of the process in phase 2?
I guess what I would say is that I think we need to consider as we go into phase 2 of this, that any decision we do make will impact communities completely. And I think that's kind of an obvious statement, but at the same time, I feel like we're not looking at it in terms of the equity if we keep schools K through 8. And what that will mean to this. We say, oh, we'll just have it for 1 year, but I don't see that being fixed for the year after. And I don't want this K through 8 model just remain at a certain school, because every year we have to figure this out. Hopefully that came through. I know my Zoom doesn't work well.
Thank you. I added it to a note.
Okay.
Concern about urgency of moving out of K8 and not leaving some schools as K8 indefinitely.
I think this is Sabrina. I don't know why I can't post this time around. So I can't, I don't know, maybe someone can post this for me. But on the K-8 thing, I know I think I shared with you guys before, I was the principal at Laurelhurst, which has a robust, big overflowing K-8 or 6-8 within a K-8. And then at Vestal, when it was teeny tiny and just how inequitable that was for kids to sort of wait on the middle school thing. So my question or point, I guess, as we go into phase 2 is like, what is the district's stance on K-8s? Because it seems like Chuck was saying that it's kind of year by year, school by school. And if a school is wealthy and has a foundation, then they can go ahead and keep theirs. And it really impacts everybody. So I guess one thing I would like clarity on is, what's the district's stance on K-8s?
I wrote a post-it on that since you weren't able to post it. Yep.
Yeah, I don't know why I can't, but.
No, strange.
Yeah, I'm sure it's me. Sure it's user error.
I know that lots of folks have written suggestions for growth. Does anybody want to speak to what they wrote who hasn't spoken aloud?
There has got to be a better document organization system.
A better document organization system. Thank you.
Did someone want to expand on that? I see a couple of items referring to documents and data and how it's
there's no way to search it. There's no way to go find a document unless you remember what name it was or what day it was introduced. There's got to be a better way to do it.
And I just want to just speak my truth as a principal too. I appreciate the time and effort people went to really digging into the documents, and it was really hard to keep up with them, especially when there was many emails right before the meeting. And I was home and able to look at them a little bit more working from home because I wasn't chasing kids around the building. But if we go, if for Lippy and we're going back for phase 2 and in the building, I just think it's going to be harder to get through the amount of emails and process it before the meetings.
I think that we need the priorities to be really clear. I'm honestly a little bit terrified facing phase 2 and all of the questions that we still have unanswered going forward around DLI, around focus option location, around split feeders, around all of these things. And I feel like a lot of these decisions are actually programmatic and instructional decisions that need to be coming out of the experts at PPS rather than based on the impressions of a bunch of parents who are having conversations about it. So I think some of those things are things we really need to get from PPS, and others are things that we need to upfront establish what the priorities are, what order those are in, how we weight those priorities so that when they're in conflict with each other, that we know we have somewhere to go to make that determination. So I want to look for ways to avoid going in circles for a lot of time in phase 2.
Thank you. I want to make sure that we have time to talk about what we should continue to do, as well as what overall hopes are for the phase 2 process, because we have about 12 minutes before 8. I see that somebody has posted in large letters, small group time is something that we should continue. Are there other things that you would like to see continue in phase 2? And Judy's posting that we're only here in our small group till 7:50. I thought we had the rest of the time together. My mistake.
I appreciated flow analytics being in our group. Just if we had needed to know numbers, we were able to know them quickly, and having Judy and Kristen having you lead. So I hope that continues as well.
I was having some audio problems. I was trying to say that, I think that this also applies to flow, but I think we need a more iterative process where we were kind of taking a shotgun approach to numerous ideas going out rather than the committee working together. So I know that's a negative, but it's something I feel would really help us, is to be more iterative in our approach rather than kind of scattered shotgun style planning. And in terms of flow, it would be wonderful if they took the input from the guidance from the coalition and used that to come up with those proposals that are, or ideas, kind of visualize the ideas. It was hard for me to see so many people having to dig deep into the weeds to come up with plans and scenarios when there's a wonderful business that can do that and should be doing that for us. So I think that would help.
Is there anything else around things that we want to continue in phase 2 and or hopes? I see that somebody wrote Harrison Park needs to be filled. That means what we just came up with in phase 1 needs to be flexible.
I would just, I think the community feedback that was shared was really important, that came from Creston and from the Chinese program. But I felt like there was a really big inequity in where that feedback was coming from. And I just think that when there's initial proposals on the table, I think it's important that all the communities can be made aware of that and have a chance to have input before there's actual proposals. Because I feel like the way it's set up now, better informed sort of high SES communities have more access to the information. Like for instance, at Bridger, we have a very low SES and also low English speaking population. And so we have hardly come to the table, other than Andy and I, during this process, because people didn't understand what was happening with enough time to be able to respond to it. So I would like to see all of the schools have an opportunity to make a case for themselves the way that Creative Science and sort of the schools that we heard a lot from had a chance to do.
Thanks. We're about to head back to the big group. Feel free to keep posting on
All right, welcome back, everyone. I want to thank you for going through that. We're going to do a lightning round, sort of report back. And to respect Dr. Simpson and the great state of Texas, we're going to start with the Willamette room first. Going to ask the facilitator and note takers if you could give us your best 30-second overview of what you discussed. And then we'll go ahead and talk about next steps and close this out so that we get out on time at 8 o'clock. So if you don't mind, starting with Stephen Stapleton and Kristen Westfall.
Yep. So we had lots of thoughts about how we can continue to improve, including making sure that all communities